Hello guys, David Vos here. Well, it's a beautiful day here. There's no clouds in the sky today, and it's a little windy, so that must mean that there is another storm pressure front coming in. Maybe it'll get warmer. We'll have some Indian summer. But I hope you're having a wonderful day. Well, guys, I did a video yesterday, and I'm very sad that I think at this point about 400 people have gone to see it. Now, I know that people usually don't flock to the videos that I do where I'm just on my motorbike or I'm walking through the forest. I get a few hundred people watching those videos. I personally think that if I had a channel just doing that and I wasn't shadow banned, I think I would get thousands of people watching those videos. However, people come to see me talk about more primal matters, we will say. Historical, religious, spiritual, esoteric, even political, and sometimes satirical information. So I want to say right off the beginning here, if you didn't watch that video, you probably did, because not too many people have. The video I did yesterday, I'm asking you to go and watch it, because you don't have to watch the first part if you don't enjoy, me riding my bike and going down the mountains and so forth. But the last part of it, 16 minutes into that video, go to that part and watch the talk that I gave on diet, on your health and dehydration and all of the bowel movement stuff that I was talking about. Please watch it, because if you are interested in health, if you are sick or ill, you need to know that information. It is the prologue to this video today. So before you watch this, I asked you to go watch the other one. Please do that, because you need to understand this if you're looking for health. If you want to cure some disease that you may have, that they've told you you have, if you want to be healthy, I can help you. This video and the video yesterday together combined, if you'll just watch them, will revolutionize your health, and you will be young again, and you will be healthy again. And I will promise you, if you'll follow these videos, and I'm not asking you to follow it blindly, just watch them, you'll understand what I'm talking about. I've explained it in simple terms that anyone and everyone can understand. And not only will you understand what I'm saying, but you will understand what it means. And you'll know and understand what is making you unhealthy, and you can correct that. So please, I'm asking anyone who needs this information, who is sick or knows someone who is sick, to watch the video yesterday before you watch this one, or at least watch both of these videos. Now, I'm talking about health and certain ancient grains, einkorn. Right off the bat, I'll just let you know, einkorn is a ancient, probably the most ancient grain that was ever cultivated. Maybe something like 23,000 years ago, they first started cultivating einkorn. And it is a type of wheat, but it's the most ancient. And it is one of only several types of grain that you can get that have only 14 chromosomes. And it's important to eat foods that are the way nature made them. Most wild grasses and wild grains have these 14 chromosomes. When you hybridize them, you're taking two breeds and breeding them together, and it doubles the chromosomes from 14 to 28. If you do it again, it goes to something like 48 chromosomes for modern wheat, because it's so hybridized. Now, that makes it harder to digest, and we're going to go through all of this. Partially because every time you do that, it causes the gluten structure to increase. So there's a lot more gluten, and it's very difficult to digest the structure of the wheat, of modern wheat and gluten. One interesting fact before we move on is that along with this einkorn, There's also spelt that has 14 chromosomes, which is an ancient wheat, and it was before the modern wheat. And one other one that you can buy all day long at the store, and I talked about how Safeway's got this kind of flour, non-genetically modified, no GMO, and it's organic, and you can get it at Safeway, and it's rye. Rye has 14 chromosomes, and it is an ancient wheat, and it was first cultivated, they think, around 12,000, 13,000 years ago. So it's almost really as good as einkorn. It's an ancient grain. It hasn't been manipulated or hybridized. So when you go to the store, if you can't order some einkorn or some spelt. Now, I've been saying emmer. Well, I did recently find out that emmer has 28 chromosomes. So I would go with the spelt or the einkorn or the rye. And I think, now the rye has certain advantages, and we'll talk about that. But the einkorn has other advantages that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about what we talked about yesterday, but I want to get to the very bottom of health today. I want to talk about your gut, and I want to talk about how your liver works, how your gut works, and why you are getting sick. This should be the most comprehensive video you will ever hear on health and your biological system, your gut, your liver, your intestinal tract, and your health, and how hormones and gut bacteria and, certain bodily functions cause disease. And it will be absolutely spot on. It will enlighten you. Because since yesterday, I've gone back and I've asked some questions and I've done some research myself. I'm honing in on all of these little thoughts that I just keep thinking about and going over in my head and asking questions and looking up the answers. And today, I think I've got the most comprehensive treatise that you will ever find that is in one, maybe hour-long video that will explain your health and how to be healthy and whether or not you can extend your life by 100 years or more. We talked about that yesterday too. But rye isn't directly related to einkorn. There are two different species, but rye is related to the wheat and the barley. And by the way, barley is another one I didn't mention, and we can still get barley, and it's not hybridized, and it has 14 chromosomes. So barley, spelt, rye, and einkorn. Now, we'll go into some other grains here in a little bit. So rye was, what I found out, was first cultivated thousands of years ago. And archaeology has traced its origins to modern-day Turkey, around 6,600 BCE. So that's a while back. But it's not really like wheat, because rye has not been hybridized. Now, the hybridization is what makes the modern wheat, so unhealthy for you, because it increases the gluten content. So we'll talk more about that. So if you were to go out in the wild and look at the rye that might be just growing wild, it's not genetically different from modern rye that you find at the store. But if you were to go find strains of wheat, wild wheat, you will see that modern wheat is crossbred over and over again, and that increases certain traits like gluten, which I guess in some senses bakers and people wanted, because the gluten makes a very sticky loaf that kind of a doughy kind of texture that people like. However, it is not good for you, and it's very indigestible. Many people cannot even digest gluten at all. Some can, but everyone should stay away from this kind of difficult, long chain structured gluten to digest. and should stick to the ancient wild grains. You can get wild rice if you want rice, but don't eat the modern white rice. This is true for all of the grains. But for centuries, the peasants and the common people ate rye. So rye is a good choice. Most people have been living on rye for thousands of years. Spelt, barley, and einkorn. Now, as I said, while rye is very old, maybe about 9,000 years ago when it was first cultivated. I mean, remember, there are wild versions of this that have been here ever since Adam, of these grains, we assume. But, we couldn't trace these grains back more than, maybe 20 or 30,000 years because I don't know how they even get it that far. But einkorn is significantly more ancient than rye, almost double, or probably double or more. So einkorn was the earliest domesticated grain. And they say it goes back to at least 10,000 years ago, 9,000 or 8,000 BC. It was cultivated in the Fertile Crescent and modern-day Turkey, which is interesting because Turkey keeps coming up in this idea of where all of our grain came from. So, the most primitive form of wheat is einkorn. It's a diploid species, and that means it has not changed its genetic makeup for thousands of years. So it is a natural grain that was designed to be eaten. However, rye was domesticated a lot later than einkorn, and people think it was around Turkey again, about 6,600 BC. Not that much different, really. Maybe 1,000, 2,000 years different. But we're talking between 7,000 for the rye and maybe as far back as 10,000 for the einkorn, which is 3,000 years that they were using einkorn. But one of the reasons was that it just got, maybe einkorn was easier to grow in those areas. And then later on they discovered rye was easier to grow. They found rye growing up like weeds in their einkorn. And they started noticing that they could take it to drier climates or colder climates. And so they started using rye. So that doesn't necessarily mean that rye is not as good as einkorn. These are two both very, very healthy grains. So rye originated in the Near East, but it didn't gain a lot of popularity into Europe and the rest of the world right away. But rye became a staple crop in northern and eastern Europe because it's resilient and it could thrive in the cold and in the colder, wetter regions and places where there were poor soils. And when they tried to grow wheat or einkorn or barley, it would fail. So rye, for those of you who want to grow something that might be easier to grow with not a lot of water and maybe cold climates, you might try rye. And rye is very good. Now, einkorn was first cultivated 10,000, maybe to 12,000, some say, years ago. So it makes it one of the earliest domesticated grains, alongside emmer. But as I said, emmer may have been hybridized because it has more chromosomes. But that's when einkorn was used or cultivated widely. However, there's evidence that people were eating einkorn as long as 30,000 years ago. This is the most ancient grain that man has, the einkorn. And in Syria, they've found, in archaeological digs, they found hunter-gatherers, and they've dug down, and they found evidence that they were eating einkorn 30,000 years ago. It was domesticated 10 or 12,000 years ago. Emmer was first cultivated about 10,000 or 12,000 years ago, just like the einkorn. So it's really about as ancient as einkorn, emmer and einkorn. But it also was harvested wild 23,000 years ago. Wild emmer was found at I looked this up, Ohalo 2 archaeological site in Israel. So 23,000 years ago they were using emmer. Emmer was taken to Egypt something like 4,500 BC. I've looked all this information up, guys, and I've compiled this from AI, and this is the information I got. And then we're going to talk about this, but I need you to understand all of this particular information that I've gone through all morning long getting this information, because I had certain questions about the dates of when these particular grains were cultivated and certain things like that. So emmer was being used in Egypt about 6,500 years ago, 6,500 years ago. And it was a crucial grain for ancient Egyptian bread and beer. So they made beer and their bread with emmer. It spread to Europe and Near East, and even in the Roman times they began to use emmer. It began to decline in the 20th century because of modern wheats like wheat that had this more gluten, was sweeter. The bakers liked it, but it wasn't good for you. It was very hybridized. By the way, I need to mention sorghum. Sorghum, and nobody eats sorghum. Nobody eats it. I think they grow it for the cattle or the animals. But sorghum may be one of the best grains. First of all, we were talking about chromosomes. And we said einkorn is the most ancient grain along with emmer. But emmer, I wouldn't say is as good as einkorn because it has 28. It's hybrid. Somewhere along the line, even though it's ancient, they've hybridized it, and the emmer that you get has 28 chromosomes rather than the 14. However, sorghum has only 10 chromosomes. And there might be some hybrids of sorghum today, but you don't normally see hybrids. I think because they don't care about how the texture is or whatever. They're feeding it to animals. Just make sure it's organic and non-GMO. But so they feed it to livestock, but it's not a hybrid. And sorghum goes back to northeastern Africa. They were cultivating it there in Africa as long as 8,000 BC. That's 10,000 years ago. So it's right up there with einkorn and these ancient grains. And it is a true grain. It's something that will grow in arid, dry, hot areas. Now, not only is sorghum wild in its pure form, it's not hybridized, it's ancient, it's a real grain, but it has no gluten whatsoever. You know, einkorn has gluten, but because it's not hybridized, the structure of the gluten is easily digested by humans. So there's no problem eating einkorn. Even if you have some gluten intolerance, I think you could start eating einkorn and spelt or rye and heal your gut and not have that problem. But if at this point you do have this gluten intolerance, sorghum is the one to use. It's a safe alternative for people with celiac disease and gluten sensitivity. You can use it to bake, and it does require, though, a binding agent like xanthan gum to compensate for the lack of gluten. Maybe put eggs in it or something like that. It doesn't stick together quite as well, and that's one of the reasons they hybridize this grain. So in a sense, that's a good thing. You don't want all that gluten. So again, rye does have gluten, but far less than modern wheat. And so rye bread is denser and it absorbs more water. And this means that it might be better for digestion as well. So I've kind of narrowed it down to einkorn or rye. You can still buy einkorn. You might have to order it. I think there are some specialty places. If you live near a big city, you can get it at the store, perhaps. But you might have to order it somewhere like Amazon or eBay or something. But einkorn is so tasty as well. I mean, it holds together. It has a little gluten, so it holds together. You can make pancakes, bread. But it is very digestible. And rye is awesome. Although, I kind of like the einkorn taste better than rye. Although, you know, there are times when I like a rye bread. And, you know, you can take a rye, and I was just telling Paula, you can put onions and olives and garlic in it, little pieces, maybe some dried tomato and butter, and kind of make a garlic, butter, olive kind of onion bread. And oh, that would be awesome with the rye. So these are two grains that I would stock. Now, sorghum might be something that you would add because it might add some nutrients and so forth. I think the rye might have more. Well, let me go through some of the differences between einkorn and rye. Those are my two top choices. Although I haven't really gotten into spelt much. But einkorn's easier to digest, especially with people that have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. But rye has more fiber, and therefore that kind of promotes more good digestion, and it will feed your gut bacteria. But they both do this. I mean, I'm just giving you the pros and cons of each, but both of them, they're very healthy. This is why you might want to get both and kind of combine them. But they both contain, well, the einkorn has gluten, but it's very different than modern wheat. It's very weak structure, so it's safe for some people with celiac disease if you don't have a severe case. But the rye has saccharin, which is a type of gluten protein, but it's not gluten-free. So you got to keep that in mind. The einkorn has a lower glycemic index than modern wheat, and that can help balance your blood sugar. But rye also has a low glycemic index and help control blood sugar. It'll make you feel fuller too, because of it just doesn't create this addiction, this sensitivity to sugar. So einkorn is higher in fiber than modern wheat, and that aids in digestion. But the einkorn is exceptionally high in fiber, and it has a lot of soluble fiber. So it's got the soluble fiber in its endosperm, which is not like a lot of the other grains. So that is why rye is so much better than just your other normal grains that you can buy at the store. So while einkorn is high in protein, far more than modern wheat and stuff, but rye is a good source of protein for everybody as well. Now, here's the thing. Einkorn is a nutritional powerhouse. This is why I like the einkorn. A nutritional powerhouse. It has antioxidants, beta-carotene, lutein, and all the essential minerals like iron and zinc and that kind of thing. Whereas rye is a excellent source of B vitamins, a lot of minerals like magnesium and selenium. So I think the best choice is einkorn. But you might want to throw a little rye in it and get the best of both worlds. You would choose einkorn if you have gluten sensitivity. You would choose rye if you're looking for a grain that's high in dietary fiber for digestion. But you would love them both. As far as what is the healthiest grain, now I think I would stick with einkorn because of the fact that it has so few chromosomes. Now, if you ask, I guess, scientists or AI, if you ask AI, what's the healthiest grain, they usually come up with oats. And people have talked about that. But let me caution you. If you go and buy oats at the store, it has glyphosate. It has preservatives. If you get any kind wheat flour, any kind of flour that's not organic, so I don't care if it's einkorn. Well, einkorn you can't get unless it's organic, because it's not sold or grown by major agriculturalists. It's private farmers. So einkorn and certain ancient grades are all organic and non-genetically modified. However, the oats, though they're so healthy in a sense, yet they are sprayed with glyphosate. So you can't get, you go to the store and you're like, oh, oatmeal for my kids, oh, buddy, this is great. You're killing them. Don't eat that kind of oats. You're going to have to go onto Amazon and order wild oats, because regular oats have 42 chromosomes. They're hybridized, meaning they are not good for you. You can't digest these long chain of structured things that aren't natural. They're not made to be digested. It's a hexaploid. It has 42 chromosomes. So it has 6 sets of chromosomes, and this is a result of hybridization. However, you can get, and you can buy it, wild oats that are a diploid wild oat, and they're called Avena strigosa. They have 14 chromosomes, just like the einkorn. The problem is there is no gluten whatsoever in oats, just like we said with the sorghum. So in order to make bread with oats or sorghum, you have to combine. This is why my mother used to make oatmeal bread. But she would put a cup of white flour, and I don't know what kind of flour back in the days when Mom was making flour, whether there was, probably wasn't any glyphosate in it in those days. But now you can't do that. You can't use white flour. But you do have to put some kind of flour in your oats. Go get the oat groats, wild groats with the 14 chromosomes that are ancient. It's an ancient grain. Make sure it's organic and non-genetically modified. And so the oats might be the healthiest grain, but you've got to get this type. And then you need to mix in maybe some einkorn or rye or something with it that's got a little gluten in order for it to be able to bind together and make a loaf. But oats are a very good choice, and maybe one of the healthiest foods if you get the wild oats and order them off of Amazon or somewhere that you can order them. I know that you can buy the seeds for the wild oats, and I'm going to be doing that. Paul and I want to grow einkorn. We want to grow a lot of these ancient grains, and I think I want to start growing the wild oats. You know, my aunt used to say, they're sowing their wild oats. Well, the kind of oats then that you would want, they're called black oats. And you can get them on Amazon and eBay and those kinds of places. You do have to be careful, because you can't just get any wild oat. It's got to be the Avena strigosa. There's another kind called the Northern Sea Oats, or Chasmanthium latifolium. I'm reading this off of, I just looked it up. And those are sold as ornamental grass, but they have a different chromosome count. So you wouldn't want to get those. And they're not really for consumption. So make sure you get the right kind. The right kind of wild oat would be the Avena strigosa, the black oat. So basically there might not be one particular grain that's the healthiest, because they have certain strengths. I'm choosing einkorn. Maybe I'm going to look into this a little bit more. Maybe oats, if you could get the wild version of that. Maybe sorghum. But again, you wouldn't be able to make bread with oats unless you added something. You wouldn't be able to make a good bread with sorghum because they don't have any gluten. And so this is why you do need, nature does provide a little sticking agent in wild grasses. There is supposed to be some gluten, but not this modern, long structured, hybridized gluten. So you see, when they tell you that something's wrong or something's bad, you know, you hear about wheat and they say, oh, wheat's not good for you, it's got all the gluten and it's bad for you. But gluten isn't bad, it's that it's a hybridized form of grain. So, while there isn't any one single healthiest grain, if you had to choose one, some people would choose the oats, and I would choose oats or einkorn. A lot of people don't choose einkorn simply because they don't know about it. Oats are something you can go out and buy, and people have heard of oats. So, with the modern kind of group of grains that we have, people usually pick oats. Nobody picks wheat because of its hybridization and everything. Oats are rich in soluble fiber, and it lowers your LDL, your bad cholesterol. So that's why I think they choose oats mostly. It's also a prebiotic because of the soluble fiber, and that would feed your bacteria that's beneficial in your gut, and that promotes healthy digestion. It's very important, but all the grains probably do a lot of this. So the high fiber content in the oats makes you feel full longer, so people use it when they're trying to lose weight, and it can aid then in your weight management if that's what you're looking for. You can get them, they're widely available, you can order them everywhere, but remember to get the wild oats. Now, after oats in the common grains that we have, rye is good, as we've said, because it reduces the risk of cancer. Now, why would you think that is? They say it reduces the risk of cancer because it helps your gut bacteria and it keeps the fiber in it, and all of this helps move it along. Grain fibers are what the body has used for thousands of years to promote certain bacteria, and they're rich in lignans, which is a compound that reduces cancer. They have a low glycemic index, and that helps with your blood sugar. That's why rye is so good for you in that particular scenario. But quinoa is also very good. It's a complete protein, which not all of the grains are complete. The more ancient the grain is, the more complete. And so einkorn is a powerhouse and has all of these amazing proteins. But quinoa is complete. It's considered complete. Now, so this means that, like even with einkorn or rye, you would probably want to add some beans or some vegetables that would be able to balance the protein so that you have a complete protein. You might have a complete protein, but it might be low in certain particular proteins. But as long as you're eating a variety of food, you would have no problem with that. And indeed, grains are almost complete. But quinoa is complete. It contains all the 9 essential amino acids, which are part of the amino acids that you need to make a complete protein. So, barley also contains even more fiber than oats, and it also has the cholesterol-lowering beta-glucan, which we talked about, that will help lower your cholesterol. Buckwheat is good. It's a gluten-free option as well, which means it's probably hard to make a loaf of bread with it, but it's not even really a grain, it's a pseudo-cereal or a seed, and it is high in antioxidants and also has a low glycemic index. But notice that some of these that we're talking about, there's lots of them. But if you're talking about a grain to make bread, what we've discovered is that rye, einkorn, and spelt are at the top of the list. There's teff, which is a tiny gluten-free grain. It's high in protein, iron, calcium, so forth. Amaranth is a gluten-free seed, not necessarily a grain, but it contains more protein than most other grains that we've been talking about. So even though I keep talking about the einkorn, the emmer, and the rye, there are other wild and ancient grains. We talked about the spelt. That's what should be put in the einkorn, emmer, and the rye category. Spelt is a very, very good choice of flour because it's kind of nutty, has a sweet flavor. People like its flavor. It's very healthy. Then there is Khorasan wheat, and that sometimes is called kamut. It's also very nutty or buttery. It's very good taste. It's kind of related to durum, which we talked about. Now, durum doesn't have 14 chromosomes. I think it's got 28. So it is hybrid a little. But durum, even though it's somewhat hybridized, is far better than regular wheat. And you can go and get whole wheat durum pasta already made at any of the grocery outlets or even Walmart. And so that's a good choice. It's high in protein, and it can be a good choice for people that have a lot of sensitivities. Then you have quinoa, which is the mother of all grains, they say. It was eaten by the Incas, South America, And it's a complete protein, like we mentioned before. Has all the 9 essential amino acids. So quinoa is a good choice. You could put some of these grains in with your other grains to get a variety of nutrients. Amaranth, as we said, buckwheat. Now, chia is very important. Chia and flax seeds can be ground up and put into your flour, and I would recommend doing that just about every time if you can. Because chia has the most, well, chia and flaxseed about the same, have the most omega-3 fatty acids, which everybody is lacking in their diet. So certainly go ahead and put that in there. Now, you would get a lot of omega-3 if you were to add some of these ancient nuts, like acorns. If you'd have to process the acorns, but you can also use nuts like pecans and walnuts. Walnuts are a good source to add to your bread because they add the oils, the omega-3s, which are so important. Okay, millet is also a gluten-free grain. They used to use that in Africa, also Asia, and they've been using that for thousands of years. There's a lot of magnesium and phosphorus. Wild rice is another amazing healthy food, not the regular rice, and you don't want to get fooled. A lot of these packages look like it's wild rice, but it's not. It's just little noodles, and it's fake. You got to get real, organic, non-genetically modified wild rice, which, by the way, is native to North America, and it's very high in dietary fiber. Then there is fonio. It's a tiny gluten-free grain. That was from West Africa. It doesn't take long to cook. You got freekeh, which is a grain made from green durum wheat, and then it's roasted and rubbed to create a nutty, smoky flavor. And people use that in special meals and, recipes in Middle Eastern areas. So as we said, rye has the same amount of chromosomes, and therefore it's not hybrid because it's the base number of chromosomes that the wild grasses come in naturally, unless they're hybridized. And right along with rye, we've got the einkorn, the rye. We've got barley, which is a close relative to wheat and rye. Rye and wheat are related, but this is the ancient wheat, you see? And so barley is a diploid. It has 14 chromosomes. So you've got to add barley up there with the spelt, the emmer, and the einkorn. Well, no, I would not use the emmer because it's got 28 chromosomes. So we'll just say the rye, the einkorn, the spelt, and the barley. And then other wild relatives, Sicali genus, which is kind of a rye, and there's a couple of other rye strains. And then other wild grasses have the 14 chromosomes that you could possibly find and cultivate. But we don't know a lot about a lot of these wild grasses. So all of these grasses or grains that we're talking about that I think are the healthiest have the 14 chromosomes. However, that is a diploid. So I thought, okay, if wild grasses sometimes only are haploids and only have 7 chromosomes, and we were saying, well, the lower the chromosomes, the better, why don't we go out and pick wild grasses with 7 chromosomes or haploid? Well, they don't really exist. They're very rare because they're sterile and they don't produce seeds. So actually, while there may be some varieties of grasses that do exist with haploid chromosomes, and perhaps you could find some, but you wouldn't be able to buy any on Amazon or anything. So we're really having to go back to grains that in ancient times people have always used. And this is what they always use, is the einkorn, spelt, and the rye, and these strains of these grains. So you say, well, is it absolutely true that the lower the chromosomes, the more digestible? Who knows, right? Exactly. Nobody knows anything, right? These are not questions that people normally ask. These are questions that I'm asking, not just to know what to eat, but why we're eating it, and what is the best formula for eating per se, and is there any secrets that we could find? Well, fewer chromosomes are related to better digestibility. For one thing, if you got more chromosomes, it's because you're doubling the chromosomes because of hybridization. And that doubles the gluten structure or increases it. And that is what causes the indigestibleness, mostly, as far as we know. If you could get a grain that had, say, 42 chromosomes, but for some reason did not have the gluten. I mean, there are breads, they claim they take the gluten out. I don't want to mess with foods that have been tampered with. What do they mean they took it out? What do you get, some tweezers and take it? No, don't mess with any of that. However, it is true that the lower number of chromosomes might make it more digestible. So perhaps you could eat those haploid grains if you could find them. Here's the thing, they're sterile, so they don't really occur in nature. I guess rarely they do, but pretty much you just can't find them in nature. So we're going to have to stick with the diploid, which is 14 chromosomes. So while there is evidence that the ancient grains that only have the 14 chromosomes are easier to digest, the biggest reason, or at least maybe the only reason, but probably the biggest reason, is because of the complex gluten structure that you get when you hybridize it. The modern wheat that people are eating doesn't have this D-genome protein, which is a set of chromosomes that provide strong, which is what causes that elastic gluten kind of substance that you can't really digest. So that's the biggest problem. But that isn't even the biggest reason why you would eat those grains, the einkorn and rye. The biggest reason is they got a lot of high fiber content. And the bran and the germ being intact provides even more fiber and also produces a lot more nutrients. They have the lower glycemic index, which is so important. All the foods that we're eating are all hybrid. And this is leading to poor digestion and the spiking of the blood sugar, which if you keep eating foods that spike your blood sugar, you end up getting diabetes. So going back to these ancient grains will remove the possibility. If you eat it all the time, this is what you eat, you simply don't have digestive problems and you don't have diabetes, and this means pretty much any other disease, and we'll explain why here. The other thing is you need to ferment the grains. This is what you do when you make bread. It ferments. It rises, and this is important because it breaks down the components that are in the grain that makes it more digestible. The sugars that are in there that are hard to digest, and any of the glutens, they ferment and then they become digestible. Now, understand, a lot of these hybridizations are natural. They're not necessarily done in laboratories. So if you go out in wild, they cross-pollinate on their own, and they will become hybrid on their own. And I'm not sure, but I think durum may have been one of those that has done that, and maybe even some oats. So it's not necessarily wrong for them to have more chromosomes or naturally hybrid. But the problem is that what scientists are doing today is they're taking these haploids with just the one set of chromosomes that are very easily to hybridize, and then they're taking versions that they make in test tubes, or that they somehow find in some rare species that they've discovered somewhere that are sterile, and then they try to mix them and match them themselves. And what you're getting is a mismatch, something that's not good for you, because nature is the only hybridization that we would and should look for. So if a grain is naturally hybridized, then it is still okay. to eat. A lot of the hybridization that they do in the laboratories ends up creating infertile varieties, so they're not usable, or varieties of plants that are just indigestible or not something you'd want to eat. Because you can make a sweeter version of wheat. You might want that, but then that might be worse for your health. So nature doesn't provide these things that end up being Frankensteins and they're bad for your health. Nature does it the way that we should do it. And we should only eat plants that are grown in nature, not hybridized by modern scientists. So I wanted to talk about the grains because I think, the Bible says that bread is the staff of life, the support, the staff that you support yourself on. So it supports your health according to the Bible. So you have to understand that in ancient times when they ate bread, they didn't necessarily just eat grain. Some of the recipe, there's a recipe in Ezekiel for bread, which includes 2 parts beans or lentils, beans and lentils, with 3 parts grains. So that is just one. I imagine that, we know that the Native Americans made breads, but they use all kinds of things. Yucca plants and, the mesquite beans and all different kinds of things they would find in the wild. They would grind up and make a flour. They use a lot of corn. And by the way, you get non-GMO and organic corn on the cob that is so delicious and sweet and delectable at Safeway. I just went there a few days ago and they have, the whole store is organic. So it's important though not to eat grain. You need to add to your loaf something like some fruit. You know how you make banana bread? Well, you can add a lot of things to it. You need fruit. Fruit has a lot of moisture. A lot of the things that grow in nature have moisture, and your body needs moisture. So fruit adds moisture content and fiber to the gut, and this helps keep the stool moving. And then it doesn't stop or back up and putreficate. And this putrefaction causes the buildup of bacteria. It's fermenting, but with the wrong bacteria. And it's not just making vinegar. It's sometimes making bad, very bad bacteria. And feeding bad bacteria. Part of the reason for that is when you have a bad bacteria, you need another bad guy to come in and eat it up. Like, you got a carcass out there laying on the ground, and what happens? Well, here come the flies. Here come the parasites. So death creates a need for more parasites and bad bacteria to clean it up. And if you don't, it might be a good thing in the short run if you're going to get healthy right away. However, if your gut is backed up for years, you're just getting a lot of infection in your bloodstream. And this is what causes disease. So it creates bacteria, and that causes infection. The infection in the gut goes into the liver. The liver stops working because it can't process it. You're just overdoing it. The liver stops, and then that ends up going into your bloodstream. And this is sepsis. And this causes all the diseases. So, fiber is a prebiotic. It acts as a food source for gut bacteria. And the food source is a source of food for the good bacteria. This is what we call fermentation, and the fiber is what does that in your gut. It produces short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate, which is a vital source of energy for the lining of your colon, the cells that line your colon. If you don't have a good lining in your colon, very bad things will happen. You create a strong barrier by eating these fibers that are in fruit and nuts and other things. And then you strengthen the gut lining, the mucosal barrier. This causes the lining of the stomach to keep all the bad stuff out of your bloodstream, out of your body, and just in the gut where it should be taken care of. And if it's bad, it'll be removed by the liver. If your liver is not tired because of being impacted with all of this fecal matter that is backed up and just putrefying, and you can't slow down this process. So if the liver doesn't fix that bad bacteria, because it's been going on too long, then harmful microbes will enter the bloodstream. Microbes and byproducts of the microbes. And this is what we call leaky gut. Leaky gut is the primary cause of death and disease in this world. So insoluble fiber adds to the bulk of the stool. Soluble fiber will soften the stool. So if you have the right combination between soluble and insoluble fiber, this will help regulate your bowel movements. But you also need to make sure you have plenty of moisture, water, mineral water, or fluids, and not be constipated. You must not eat foods that constipate you, because if you do, you will cause what is the precursor for all disease. So there is a little thing called a portal vein, and that's what leads to the liver. Blood from your digestive tract, which is carrying all these nutrients and the waste, bacteria, and the products of bacteria, they're traveling down to the liver through the portal vein. Now, the liver is a filter, and it acts as the body's primary filter. It processes the food, the nutrients, it detoxifies the body and removes all the harmful things that's in your blood before they get into the bloodstream and circulate. It's very important. If you don't have a good liver and it gets into your bloodstream, this is what literally is going to be your downfall. And this is happening to people, and people can live for years kind of in and out of this situation. And nobody seems to be able to, to understand this. They don't treat it. Doctors don't treat. Somebody comes in obese, you can see the signs all over their entire body. Well, they see their liver, their pancreas, or their gallbladder, or anything breaking down and not functioning, and immediately they we can cut it out, we can remove it, transplant it, do surgery. They never think about, why don't we just give you some water, some fasting, and maybe an enema, and get you going again, and within hours you'll be back to normal or getting there. But they are lying to us all, because they could have known all of this. So your gut has a barrier. If you don't have a healthy diet, you get inflammation, which is an infection, basically. And it's another thing that I don't think even doctors have a clue what inflammation is. You could look up inflammation and what causes it, and they'll always tell you some mumbo jumbo. It ain't the truth. The truth is that inflammation is infection of things that shouldn't be in there, that putrefy and get worse because they're in there if you're not going to the bathroom. So it leads to bacterial translocation, is what they call it. This happens when the bacteria or any of the other toxins go from the gut right into the portal vein and into the liver. Now, if you overload the liver, even though your liver might be healthy and it can handle a normal load of bacteria and it can handle a normal load of bacteria or poisons, this happens. This is what the liver's for. But prolonged or excessive bacterial translocation overwhelms the liver's filtering capacity. It triggers chronic inflammation because it's See, what is inflammation? It's the liver not being able to process all these toxins. Man, if they would just teach people this stuff, if doctors knew this kind of stuff, if doctors knew that you could stop eating poison and drink water and get your gut moving and heal, get an enema, colonoscopy or something, you could heal someone of any disease, provided that when you give them the enema and you fast and you do everything right and start eating right, you got to continue to eat right after that. Don't go back into your old habits. So the chronic inflammation that's in the liver will then go into the bloodstream, and you can have very serious conditions. Fibrosis, cirrhosis of the liver. It can cause cancer. It will cause cancer. It will cause all the other diseases, friends. Because when the liver is overworked, and I don't even like that word. It just makes it sound like the liver's working down there. It's got bearings and belts and, it's going around and around and just wearing out. It isn't wearing out. It cannot wear out. Your body is energies, vibrations. Each vibration has its own texture. And if it's a fine vibration, that's a better way to understand it than this examples that they give you with all these little particles and compounds and things that form together. There are no compounds. There might be little compounds in our mind. That's how we think of them. But what we're talking about is certain degrees in varying vibrations that are more dense or more light. Your body has a specific fingerprint. That's really what DNA is. It's not, it is kind of spiraling like they show, but it doesn't look like what they show in the pictures. That's all CGI. DNA is your specific vortex. It's your Fibonacci ratio. It's a specific blueprint that you have. Now, I suppose everything in the universe goes in line with the golden ratio. 1.618 or whatever it is. But if you were to take that and imagine it as a slinky, now if you pushed it together down to about 1.5 inches where it comes, you get it right out of the box, that is what you would call the more dense vibration. They're close together, each of the rings. If you were to stretch it out, you get more space between each ring, and now it's lighter, or there's more air that goes through. So this is what really life is, not what they have told you. So when the liver is inflamed, it releases pro-inflammatory cytokines. This is their language, cytokines. I think you could understand all of this better by understanding now you've got a cog in the wheel. You've got a vortex or a vibration that's kind of wobbling and spinning crazy. It's sick. It's a dying vibration. And it isn't harmonious with your bloodstream or your body or cells or making your body. The Lord made the fruit and the nuts and the grains and the food, what is real food, at the right vibrationary level that it feeds our vibrations in our body and strengthens our vibrations. If we were perfect and we had positive thought, absolute positive thought all the time, we wouldn't need to eat because our mind is controlling the vibration and keeping us in perfect health. So mind is the strongest element in this whole part of being healthy. Mind is the most important part. The weaker the mind, the more you tend to die, and you will go and eat poisons because you maybe deep inside subconsciously are trying to kill yourself. But the positive thoughts are a high harmonious vibration. Singing can improve your health. Praying improves your health. Positive visualization and positive thoughts and loving others will do more for your health than anything else. However, when you want to eat or you want to share vibrations with other things, you consume not the bark not the tree, not a rock, but forms of energy that are literally made to be shared. So on the tree produces fruit. It is the right consistency for digestion so that it can mesh or come into harmony with your body and strengthen your body rather than make it worse. So then you have the gut-brain axis. A gut microbiome communicates with the brain. If you don't have the right bacteria in your gut, you're not going to communicate with the brain, your pituitary, your pineal. It's not going to send out the hormones to maybe grow. You might stunt your growth when you're little if you're depressed or sick or eating poisons. Or even when you're older, it may cause a woman to go into menopause earlier. In fact, we don't even know if women ever are supposed to go into menopause. It may be a sign of the body going berserk, or it may be a natural thing that even if we were to live forever, women at about the age of 50 go into menopause so they don't have to have children the rest of eternity. We're not sure about these things. We've seen old people grow teeth after the age of 100. Is it possible that your teeth are supposed to last over 100 years and you get a new set? We don't know any of these things. If your body is producing stem cells, then you will repair your body forever. Right? Potentially, as far as we know. Now, the only reason your liver wouldn't be promoting stem cells and providing you with these nutrients and things that you need is if it's not working, and it can't stop working. It's like a sponge. A sponge doesn't stop working. Right? Water go through it and keep going through it and keep going through it. And it's not like a sponge, because a sponge will wear out, but your liver doesn't. It keeps growing and replenishing itself. The only thing that can happen is if you take that liver or the sponge and you start putting cement in it rather than water or foods or nutrients that are naturally absorbed by the body. They're absorbed into the bloodstream and then they go in and they make cells, then that's natural. But if you're putting things in there that don't naturally absorb, and what that means is vibrationary cells, vortices that are contrary to the harmonious vibrations of your body. They weren't meant to be eaten. So if you have that problem, and you would if you're getting backed up, you're not only causing yourself to be physically ill, but mentally ill, because it's causing a neurological health problem. And it will then influence your mood. Definitely. You could get very depressed and literally psychotic from being sick. You can have metabolic disorders. When your gut is imbalanced, you can have dysbiosis, which is linked to metabolic issues like obesity and type 2 diabetes. So this means that it causes these diseases. If you don't have it, you don't get to diabetes. If you don't have an imbalance in your gut, you don't get obese. You see. So we might have oversimplified it, but probably not. Nobody knows the exact, details of everything going on in the gut. But this is what I've determined from my research over the last several months. And today especially, I've been looking all of this up. And this is the best treatise that you will find anywhere on the internet. And I hope and pray that all of you will take this information seriously and pass it on to your friends. It could save everyone's life. Anyone and everyone who reads this. We all need to know this. Even if you're healthy or you think you're healthy, you need to know this so that you can prevent yourself from being unhealthy. So fruit does prevent infection. And it does prevent liver clogging. And it does prevent disease. Period. So, now, we want to go into another aspect, which we're going to go into here. Dehydration and a lack of fiber does lead to constipation. That's a guarantee. You can literally have great complications if you don't get this fixed. The colon, which is your large intestine, absorbs water. and it absorbs water from waste to form the solid stool. If you don't drink enough water, your body will take it from the stool. It'll try to get moisture from the stool. This then makes your stool hard, and it makes it dry because it's taking out the water. Therefore, it becomes more and more difficult to pass through your colon. And then that's what leads to constipation, dehydration, friends. That's the answer. That is it, period. End of story. If you don't want to be dehydrated, you must drink mineral water. And fruit that has water in it, and foods that have water and fiber and all these things. So fiber, is very important for keeping the stool consistent as well. Because the fiber, like fruit, it works with the water to soften the stool. So that's why when people eat prunes, they are able to go to the bathroom. So if you do get dehydrated, you need to eat a lot of fruit juice and prune juice in order to get it flowing again. And then you can soften the stool, and you add fiber, because prunes have fiber. And then it will smoothly go through the colon, and bad bacteria is going out and not going through the liver and into the bloodstream and causing disease. So if you have this constipation and you don't do anything about it, you can handle constipation once in a while, but that don't mean it's good for you. But you might not get cancer the first few times you do this. But if it becomes chronic, you will get disease. This is why when people get older, they have disease, because they've had chronic constipation and poison foods. So, your colon can handle waste. That's what it's designed for. But it's designed also to eat proper food. If you eat poison, look, this is a fact, Jack. Go out and eat a bunch of poison, and you're going to die. That's the scenario. That's the problem here. Right? That's how math works in the gut. You eat bad things, you die. If you do not treat your constipation, your stool will backlog and then cause serious complications. You can have fecal impaction, and I believe that it's far more widespread than most people realize, or even doctors have ever dreamed. I think the average person in their 50s have fecal impaction. And this means most of you who are older probably need to have enemas, start drinking fruit juices, go on a fruit juice fast in order to stop this immediately before you get any older. It not only makes bacteria an infection, but it causes pressure on your intestinal walls. It will then sometimes make little tears in your gut because it's hard, it's impacted. There are reports of people who they can't go to the bathroom because it feels like they're being cut by shards, because the poo is dried out so bad that it's cutting their rectal area. And it's also doing it in the gut as it's going through. And if you're causing your gut to rip, tear, or be cut, that's also going to cause infection into the blood from that avenue. So what they call that is leaky gut. And it will leak into the abdominal cavity. And then that will give you life-threatening disease right there. They call that peritonitis. But I don't really care much about what they call it. Then they've got a word, diverticulosis. Diverticulosis, which is small pouches or little areas in the colon wall. They got all these names for everything, but they don't do anything about it. When you get constipated, it can cause your stool to get trapped and then infected in these little pouches or these little cubby holes in your colon walls. This is what leads to inflammation, guys. And inflammation, ask any doctor, they even know this. is what causes disease. You don't want inflammation. If you don't want inflammation, then you've got to have a stool that's going all the time like it should. So, if you get this peritonitis or this other, long word that they give us, well, you got infection. And this could lead to sepsis. Once it gets to sepsis, you're going to die. And it'll spread throughout your bloodstream. But the sad thing, like I said before, I think a lot of people have this condition. I think they have it periodically, and some people, if they have it for a longer period of time, they are at the verge of death for months and months, and doctors don't seem to understand what's going on. Oh, their liver's gone, or oh, they're this or that, All they got to do is get the gut fixed. So, you see, the liver would normally filter all these toxins from the blood because it's going down into the portal vein through the liver. But if you've got a lot of infection and you're backed up, then your immune system is overwhelmed, and that's what your immune system is. When doctors talk about immune system, they want to get all technical with you and use all these highfalutin words, and they're talking about the high-end immune problems. But it's really because of the smaller, low-end part. It's because of the not being able to go to the bathroom, which is causing the infection, and the holes and the rips and the tears and the leaky gut. If you got a little hole in your colon for some crazy reason, and you were healthy, your body would just repair it. You probably wouldn't have too much problem. But you're just unhealthy everywhere, and all because you're not going to the bathroom, and you're not drinking water and eating fruits. So that causes chronic disease. And that probably concludes today's video, because we're like way over an hour, and that's kind of what I wanted to explain. I am worried that this is too boring, bunch of mumbo jumbo, and very few people are going to watch this. There's so many people that need to watch this and spend time listening and understanding this information. If you don't understand it, you won't believe it. If you don't believe it, you won't practice it. If you will just listen carefully, and I'm already thinking about, well, the first part of the video was just all about bread. And people are like, well, I don't want to know about bread and grains. But I wanted you to understand why you need to eat that kind of grain. That was important. I think maybe I should have done the last part of the video first. Maybe that would have been more interesting for some. But I hope you got through it. If you got to this point, but you didn't pay attention to some of it, you really need to go back and take notes if you have to. Even if you're healthy, you feel, you need to know this so that you can stay healthy. You need to understand health. The entire system that we have been taught, like things on your body just wear out. Like there's belts and bearings and all these weird things just going around and spinning, and it just eventually wears out. Your body doesn't wear out. It literally is like we talked about with the filter. A filter might get clogged or wear out, but your body replaces the filter every several weeks, the liver, and replaces everything on your body. Your skin heals. You can see it healing. And the only reason you got scars afterwards is you're not healing very well. You need stem cells, and that means you've got to be healthy all the way down to your liver. Your liver will function, continue to function for all practical purposes, as far as logic can guide us in this. It would appear that the body continues to repair itself. All it needs is the proper nutrition, water, sunshine, air, positive thinking, happiness, all of these things. Maybe some of these things that you feel like you have no control over, you're not happy. Well, part of that could be your diet. But you need to work on all of these things. Holistic healing is what we need to concentrate on. But I'm going to go ahead and go. Now, I really hope you have a wonderful evening. The Lord, will bless you. He loves everybody. His grace and His peace will be with you. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one, guys.